Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Right now, as we speak, 99% of the vote count in total is in Michigan, and Alyssa Slotkin is up against Mike Rogers by just 0.3 of a percentage point. The margin is incredibly tight. Then you go to Pennsylvania. Dave McCormick is up 49.1% to Bob Casey's 48.4% with 97% of the votes in. And in Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin is holding on to about a 1-point lead, 49.4% to Eric Hovde's 48.5%. 99% of the votes are in there, but all three, Joe, still too close to call right now.
Could drop on us while we're on the air here now, which is a great opportunity to bring in Cook Political Report Senate and Governor's Editor Jessica Taylor. This is Jessica's specialty, and Jessica, it's great to have you back. You've probably been up all night as well. Your expectation, now that we've seen Michigan be called by the Associated Press on the presidential level, what happens to this Senate race?
I think that when I look at, like you said, almost all of the vote count is in. I was talking with my sources, both Democratic and Republican, this morning. They were waiting on Wayne County to come in there, and they expected that would break pretty heavily for Slotkin. If I'm on 1 hour of sleep, so it looks like she's ahead by about 18,000 votes right now. I think that's probably hard to overcome at this point. As you mentioned, it's very close, but I think that she's probably going to hold on there, so that's a hold there. In the Senate race. In Wisconsin, we don't have that race called yet either, but again, based on what I'm seeing and talking to my sources, they expect that Tammy Baldwin is going to win a very, very close race there, even as, again, Trump has won the state. The one that's most surprising to me is Pennsylvania. You were mentioning another very close race David McCormick is leading Democratic Senator Bob Casey there. When I look at where the outstanding vote is, there were some vote tabulation machine malfunctions in Cambria County, which is Johnstown, and that's a very Republican stronghold. There are some still outstanding absentee ballots in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia, but once we get that Cambria County vote in, I don't think it's going to be enough for Casey to make up the difference in those bigger population centers. So again, not called yet. We don't know what the results are going to be till they finally come in, but I would much rather be McCormick in this instance. And in those other races, I do think that Democrats are going to hold on to Michigan and Wisconsin.
Well, and then there's Nevada, Jessica. Right now, 84% of the votes are in. Sam Brown, the Republican challenger, is up 0.1 of a percentage point right now against the incumbent, Jackie Rosen. We're talking a margin here of less than 1,000 votes. I don't know if you have a strong feeling about what way this goes ultimately when all the counts are in. But for this race and some of the others we were just talking about, what's the likelihood of recounts and potential legal challenges here?
I think in Nevada, I think Democrats were always sort of preparing for, and Republicans were for, I think, some very late counting because they have to sort of cure ballots. There's absentee ballots that could certainly face legal challenges and things too. Again, when I look at sort of the outstanding vote, Rosen is leading there, and most of the vote is still left in Washoe, which is Reno, and in Clark County, which is Las Vegas. I would rather be her in this instance, but again, I think it's going to be very, very close. This was a race I was hearing from Republicans that they felt like was breaking their way pretty late, largely because of the presidential race there, even though Rosen had a pretty substantial lead for much of the race. So again, this is another one. So I think by my count right now, Republicans have at least a 52-48 majority. That means they flipped West Virginia, which we knew. They flipped Ohio, and they flipped Montana. Those were the ones that we expected more. They flipped Pennsylvania like I expect that they will. That's 53. So Nevada, maybe that could be 54.
Wow. Well, Jessica, if a rising tide lifts all boats, Kari Lake sprung a leak somewhere. And I'm wondering what you thought about this. Ruben Gallego, the Democrat, on a night like that, taking a lead over such a well-known Republican candidate, former TV news anchor, closely associated with Donald Trump. Where did she go wrong?
She was well known, and that was her problem. She came in with very high negatives from that 2022 gubernatorial race. Mitch McConnell gave a press conference on Capitol Hill earlier today. They asked him what his takeaway was from the Senate races. He said candidate quality matters. That's why they feel like they got strong candidates there in Pennsylvania with David McCormick, and races there in Montana as well. Kari Lake was not a strong candidate. We knew this going in, that she was a very polarizing figure. She came in high negatives, was never really able to overcome them, never really sort of, in that that race for governor, she insulted sort of McCain voters and those swing voters there in Maricopa County that makes up over 60% of the vote. Gallego ran a very smart race. He was able to spend early on. He had the spending advantage. He was able to introduce himself there, even in a state where he was more progressive than the state's other senator, Mike Kailey, that ran as more of a centrist. So he was able to tell his story, being raised in poverty by a single mother, going on to be in the Marines. So I think that also we saw him do better with the types of voters that Donald Trump was doing better with Latino men and black men. So those were the split ticket voters. But also those independents broke against Kari Lake, and I think it's because she was sort of the wrong candidate for the moment in Arizona.
Well, as we consider the idea of split ticketing, you look at a state, considering you follow gubernatorial races as well, like North Carolina, which of course Donald Trump won by a margin of about 4 points or a little under that. Josh Stein, the Democratic candidate for governor, won by 14 points in North Carolina. What's the takeaway there, Jessica?
Again, the candidates matter. And you had the lieutenant governor there that Republicans, many of them knew early on, was a very controversial candidate. And then you had a scandal that came out about allegedly posting on a porn site and talking about being a black Nazi. Republicans largely abandoned him. He didn't have much of a campaign infrastructure to begin with. He was off air on advertising for the last 2 months of the campaign, basically. But I think also voters do look at a vote for governor and a vote for Senate very differently. Actually, in the last 100 years there in North Carolina, they've only elected a Republican governor 3 times. So they are used to splitting their tickets. And in fact, even as Trump carried the state in 2016 and in 2020, Roy Cooper won both times. But actually, apart from the top of the ticket at the presidential level, some North Carolina Democrats were having a pretty good night. And I think that was sort of Stein helping them. They've broken the supermajority in the state legislature. They won the attorney general's race. Democrats have kept that seat. And then they also won a Secretary of Public Instruction, basically the Secretary of Education there, that was also with a very controversial Republican candidate.
All right, Jessica, I want to talk leadership with you here now that we're looking at a red Senate here. And I guess to your point, we could still add a couple more to the list. There is a thought with Donald Trump on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue that this is not the race we thought it was to replace Mitch McConnell, that Steve Daines could even be drafted late in the game here. We're only a couple of weeks out from this. What's about to happen?
Daines did give an interview with Semaphore where he did say, again, he would not be drafted. He was not interested in doing this. I wouldn't be surprised to see him in leadership in some position, especially after having a very strong showing for Senate Republicans. He was my dark horse, but he like I said, he gave that interview to Burgess Everett there, Semaphore, last week and said that he would not be there. So we have the 2 of the Johns, John Thune of South Dakota and John Cornyn of Texas. Now, they have had a rockier relationship with Trump. Rick Scott of Florida has also thrown his name in there. Now, he had a bigger than expected victory after having sort of very narrow wins for governor and for Senate. But he also had a very controversial tenure at the top of the National Republican Senatorial Committee in 2022 when they actually lost a seat. So I think it's going to be a lot of jockeying behind the scenes. I think probably still Thune or Cornyn have the inside slot. But like you said, is there another candidate that emerges? Perhaps 2.
All right, Jessica Taylor, the Cook Political Report Senate and Governors editor. Thanks, you so much for joining us.